Well, what are the laws of war? In brief, they are a body of rules, sometimes customs, habits, what we call norms, norms meaning like, things that are normal, things that are traditional, as well as laws that govern the use of force in wartime. And the laws of war have been around more or less as long as wars have been around in some way, shape, or form. They've been around since the earliest, Greek civilizations. From around 750 BC to 490 BC, Greeks had certain customs, certain habits or principles that governed war. For example, the Greeks believed that war should always be declared openly. So you have to have a declaration of war. They believed that war should be based on a just cause. Why was that? Because they wanted the favor of the gods, and they felt that if they behaved dishonorably, or if they waged war unjustly, they would not get the favor of the gods. So there was a kind of inherent reason for claiming that your war was just, and that was to earn the favor, the good fortune of the gods. The early Greeks believed that, a promise made in wartime, to respect a truce, for example, and if it was made in the name of the gods, it had to be honored. So a treaty or a truce, these kinds of promises had to be honored and respected. The Greeks believed that a herald who might go between two sides in the middle of a war or a battle to negotiate, the herald should be respected. And that's interesting because, of course, the herald is identified with one of the gods, Hermes, who you remember had little wings on his feet. He was the herald, the messenger, and they have to be respected. The Greeks believed that houses of worship and temples should be respected, that they were sacrosanct. The Greeks believed that you should be allowed to collect your dead after the battle and bury them respectfully. So, wars were very common back then, but on the whole, they were mostly relatively small in scale. They lasted relatively briefly, maybe even just a day, the length of one battle, in part because city-states were then so small. And because they didn't have the logistics to run these, gigantic wars of annihilation. So these kinds of customs of war did govern certain of the conflicts between city-states. Now, there's just one thing, though, that I want to point out because it's a thread that runs through my talk today. These customs of war that I'm describing in the Archaic period, they were more or less reserved for conflict between Greeks. But when the Greeks fought people who were not Greek, when the Greeks fought wars of colonization or empire, particularly, for example, against the Persians, people who were not like us, well, then those customs and habits of war began to disappear. And they became wars that were perceived to be wars of survival. In conflicts with the Persians, Greek warfare became increasingly, characterized by a kind of to the victor go the spoils. Whatever you win on the battlefield, you can do. You can sack defeated cities, execute adult males, enslave the women. And this kind of behavior did start to characterize classical warfare between Greeks and Persians in around 330 BC, when Alexander the Great was waging war with the Persians. In any case, the point here is I'm getting at is just by glancing at the ancient world, we see that certain beliefs and customs about creating rules of war coexisted with many acts of barbarism. That is, human beings have always had a conscience about having sort of principles or customs of war to make it less awful, but we have also always broken those customs. But they have coexisted, and that tension still exists very much today. It just reminds us that in our long history as a sort of human civilization, we have tried at different times to impose some order on the anarchy of war. We haven't done a very good job of it, but we have tried. And that effort to try tells us something about who we are. Now, the customs of war have long been violated. And I just want to give you a little illustration that's drawn from Shakespeare to give you an idea of what we mean when we talk about violating the customs or laws of war. So this is a painting, but it's meant to depict a scene that was written about by Shakespeare in the great play Henry V. You probably know that play. It's one of the most popular ones. It's been done on the screen many times. In this story, the young King Henry, he has decided to invade France. He believes he has just cause to invade France. He believes he has a legal right to the throne of France, in fact, through intermarriage. And in 1415, he sends a large army across the Channel to invade France at Normandy. And he runs into some stubborn French defenders at this walled city called Harfleur. Well, Henry's troops surround the city. They start to lay siege to it. They fire cannons into it. They try to put mines underneath the walls, and it takes a long time, and it's going badly. And Henry's troops are getting tired, and they're getting hungry, and they want this siege to be over. So Henry decides to bluff. He decides to try to bluff the French governor of the town to give up because he wants this thing to be over. So what does he do to bluff? Well, he sends a message to the governor of the French city, and he threatens them with terrible destruction if they do not surrender immediately. And let me read for you what Henry V, the king, says to the French governor of the town that his men will do if he does not surrender immediately. How yet resolves the governor of the town, asks Henry. If I begin the battery once again, I will not leave the half-achieved Harfleur till in her ashes she lie buried. The gates of mercy will all be shut, and the fleshed soldier rough and hard at heart, in liberty of bloody hand, shall range with conscience wide as hell, mowing like grass your fresh fair virgins and your flowering infants. What is it to me when you yourselves are the cause if your pure maidens fall into the hand of hot and forcing violation? Therefore, you men of Harfleur, take pity of your town and your people while yet my soldiers are in my command. If not, why, in a moment, look to see the blind and bloody soldier with foul hand defile the locks of your shrill, shrieking daughters, your fathers taken by their silver beards and their most reverend heads dashed to the walls, your naked infants spitted upon pikes, while the mad mothers with their howls confused do break the clouds. That is what Henry is threatening his men will do if they had to fight their way into the city. Now, in the play, the audience knows this is a bluff. The audience knows that Henry V wants to be a good king, a Christian king. He's using this theater of war to threaten the French. And in the play, the French open their gates and they surrender the town because Henry is so persuasive. But what I wanted to do in reading that to you is to remind you of what people in the early modern European world imagined would happen in wartime. The slaughter of the innocents by one army that vanquished another. Just reminds us that Henry's bluff was powerful because those scenes were common in early modern warfare.